Bradley. I am one of the Neighborhood Council representatives and the founder of the Glassell Park Neighborhood.
That's right. And Bradley, one word like Cher, Madonna.
Easy to remember. No fuss.
So,
Just like our Neighborhood Council.
We have to thank him for making this lovely space available for us. And so we're going to get started with some folks from Plan Check. I'm going to let Cindy Cleghorn come up and talk about what they do and get the show started. And then we have some wonderful representatives from the planning department that are going to take us through some very extremely useful tools to help you navigate the maze of planning and land use. And when we get to that portion, we'll let them introduce themselves. So just help yourselves to the food. The restrooms are around this corner, and please don't hesitate to ask us for anything. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Morning. My name is Cindy Cleghorn, and I'm currently chair for Plan Check NC. It's a alliance of neighborhood councils and community groups that come together once a month to talk about planning. And most of us that attend regularly are either chairs of their land use committees or sit as committee members of land use committees. I too want to thank Glassell Park, Bradley, good to see you. We love coming to Glassell Park because it's so easy to get to, and we're kind of like right in the center of the hub of the city. So thank you. For me, I always like to see who's here representing around the room. So if it's okay with you, can we go around the room really quick and see who's here? Let's start over here and say where you're from, your community, and what you do in your community.
Okay. Actually, my name is Ever Martinez.
Speak up.
Very loud.
Okay, my name is Ever Martinez. I work for the City Planning Department. I will be presenting one of our web-based applications called CMAS. I'm glad to be here today.
Wonderful. We're so glad you're
All
here.
right.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I'm Gary Agus. I'm the president of the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council.
I'm Mike O'Gara. I'm one of the vice presidents for the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council.
Margaret Landers, Secretary, Northridge South.
My name is Barbara Nance. I'm the co-chair of the Flute Committee for Midtown North Hollywood Neighborhood Council.
Flute. What did you call it?
Planning, land use, housing. That's
Good,
what we always
wonderful.
call it.
Barbara Ringette, I'm on the committee of, it's a land use committee, it's a long name.
Great.
Silver Lake.
Silver Lake. Great.
I'm Bill Anderson. I'm Community Services Chair of the Building Owners and Neighborhood Council.
Wonderful.
I'm Bob Green, Canoga Park Neighborhood Council. I'm on the board of Outreach, Land Usage, Emergency, and Budget.
Good morning, my name is Alexia Terra. I live in Cypress Park, which is just down the street. I'm a board member, I'm the outreach chair, and I'm here because nobody else is here.
Good morning, I'm Corinne Gold, president of the Canoga Park Neighborhood Council.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rafael Chagoya. I am a board member in the Boyle Heights Community Council, and I'm also the chair of the Planning Port Committee.
Victor Suarez, and I'm part of the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council.
Sue Beidelman, I am land use chair for Cooper Neighborhood Council from the Pierce Heights Community Representatives.
Mary Louise Morgan, I'm on the land use committee for Cooper Neighborhood Council, and I am the chairperson of the board for Carthay Square Neighborhood Association.
We're going to jump back to Sarah.
Oh, thank you, Cindy. Good morning. I'm Sarah Ramsawak from the North Hollywood Northeast Neighborhood Council. I'm the secretary and the land use chair.
Wonderful.
Baker Montgomery from Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council, and I'm on the land use committee.
Hi, my name is Jose Galames. I'm for the Dunn Department. I do the maps and media, so I'm here covering.
Wonderful. And the gentleman in the back.
I'm Nelson Castillo. I'm the president of the Westlake South Neighborhood Council.
Randy.
Randy Waller, Westlake North and South.
My name is Jose Torres. I'm from the Studio Hollywood Neighborhood Council. I participate in the bylaw committee, but I also here as a stakeholder.
Wonderful.
My name is Raul Munoz. I'm a resident of East Hollywood.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to jump back over here.
Robert Guevara, Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council, passed.
Great.
I'm Mark Caratao, member of the board of the Greater Eco Park Alicia Neighborhood Council, and I sit at the Planning and Land Use Committee.
Wonderful. I want to especially introduce two representatives here from Plan Check also, Sharon Commons. She sits on our steering committee, and Marlene Savage. They also co-chair of the RAC, which is the West Side Regional Alliance of Neighborhood Councils, so you want to get to know them as well. Let's see, let's go around a little bit more so everybody knows who everybody is. Hi. Did I forget you? I'm so sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Moira Gomez, Mount Washington, Arroyo Seco Neighborhood Council, Mount Washington Neighborhood Watch.
Hi, good morning. Heidi Rita Lopez. I'm with the Alice City Planning Department, and I'm the liaison to the neighborhood council.
As we appreciate Heidi, she comes to our monthly Plan Check meetings every month, and we really appreciate her as our liaison. Alan Bell is here from the Planning Department, and you're going to hear from him later, but if you want to say a little something real quick. First.
Sure. My name is Alan Bell. I'm the Deputy Director of the Planning Department, so very happy to be here this morning.
We're glad to have him too. He comes to our meetings on a regular basis as well. Let's see. And you already were introduced to Barry. I haven't seen Barry in a long time, and Amber. It's so great to see both of you. It's really great. So, really quick, I just want to tell you.
Do you want to thank them for all that you spread?
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you for the warm hospitality from Glassell Park and to the Planning Department. We're happy to see everybody. I'm really grateful to see so many new folks that I haven't had a chance to meet before. I've been involved with planning and land use since I moved my business to Tujunga, because I'm with the Sunland Tujunga Neighborhood Council. And so my introduction to planning was immediate because I needed to get my business up to code. And I learned that I needed to also go through the planning department. So since then, the rest is history. I've continued to be involved in my community in a number of different ways, and I'm sure that many of you have as well. Plan Check NC is an alliance of those of us who are participating so that we can come together to learn more about planning and land use. We bring in speakers. The handout that you have shows some of the history of Plan Check and what we've accomplished and what we set out to do. The Plan Check has also been responsible for the planning pilot program, which is why your neighborhood councils receive the early notification of planning and land use applications. Plan Check started, or at least for me, way back in 2008 when I took this class. I don't know if anybody remembers this class, but it was a very well put together class that included a planning expediter type of person who goes before the planning and land use matters that applicants will hire, as well as members of the planning department and those out in the community. It was, I think, over a 4-week or 4-month time. I welcome you to come and take a look at the book while you're here today, perhaps when there's a break, so that you can see what we work to do to get involved and learn more about the planning and land use process. So with that came Plan Check, and Plan Check continues monthly to continue this and the education. It's important for those of us who are involved in this in our communities to be as educated as possible. And things are always changing, and I'm sure you'll hear about it more from those with the planning department, how things are evolving when you have, new administration, also new laws, new rules that are coming to be. So, but at the same time, we want the best for our communities, and we want to participate, and we want to engage those in our communities around those projects in the processes. So I hope that you will continue, and Plan Check is here to help you do that with our second Saturday of the month monthly programs, as well as working and continuing with the planning department to help you when these packets arrive in the mail. So how many people have seen these packets arrive in the mail? And how many people know what to do with them once you get them? All right. So I'm not going to take up too much time because this is really intended to be a basic training. But later on, as the conversations and the questions happen, I would love to have an opportunity to talk with you more about how and what I have seen through the last 10, 12 years of being involved in neighborhood council. But very quickly, the first thing that I want to make sure that you do with them is make sure that they get copied and out. Let people know, get them into your committees, and start to go over what you see, because this is the only packet that we receive. Everything else subsequent to that, you need to go and get. And a lot of times, there's more information that, or there's information in here that wasn't enough, so you need to make sure that you go and get it. And so those are the types of things that you learn as you go through and become involved, working together with the network of other neighborhood councils throughout the city, as well as participating in plan check meetings and so forth. So with that, I'm going to step aside for a few minutes and hope to come back and help to answer questions. And also Marlene and Sharon, I look to them for any questions that you may have, which we take a break later. And who's next? Alan Bell. I'd like to introduce Alan Bell. As I said earlier, Alan has been regularly attending plan check meetings and participating, giving us updates on what's new in city planning, and we're very grateful to Alan, and thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. So, as Cindy said, this is going to be a very basic training, introduction to the planning department and the planning process. So this is probably going to be definitely very familiar to a lot of people in this room. So bear with me. We'll have a lot of different, do you want me to move?
That's right there. That's good.
Right here?
Right there.
All right, great. So planning basics, planning 101. So I'm going to go over what the function of the planning department, what the planning process is, and then more importantly, how neighborhood councils, members of the community can participate in the planning process. So we have the PowerPoint?
Yeah. We also have the PowerPoint translated in Spanish in case you want to follow in another language.
Okay. I have to stand over here, sir. All right, I'm going to wait for the PowerPoint to show up, and then I'll get into the presentation. All right. Can people see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you guys see it?
Got it. All right, great. Okay, so this slide, so it asks the basic question, what is planning? Obviously, that's a very important question. It's the kind of question that I get asked whenever I go to a party, and people say, well, what do you do? And I say, well, I'm a planner. Oftentimes people get that confused. They think that I'm planting trees or something. Most people really don't know what that is. So in a nutshell, planning is all about thinking ahead. It's about looking to the future. And the Department of City Planning, among all the different city agencies, is probably the one city agency that has that responsibility of looking to the future. So when we look at the future, we look at how changes we anticipate will occur. We look at population growth. We get information about where we are growing, increases in population, increases in employment, changes in housing. So we collect this information, we collect these statistics from different governmental agencies, and we try to figure out, well, what does this tell us? What is going to happen? How is the city going to change over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, over the next 20 years and beyond? So it's looking ahead, it's trying to anticipate what these changes are and what that means for Los Angeles and how we can create plans that respond to those kinds of changes. So again, in the process of planning, we're looking at what are the issues that Los Angeles is facing today. What are the problems? Unemployment, lower quality of life, not enough parks, decrease in public services. So in terms of trying to find out what are these conditions, trying to find out what are the problems and the issues that communities are facing today. We gather these statistics, as I just mentioned, but we also meet with the community groups, and we hear from them, because the people who really know the communities more than anybody else are the people who live here and who are invested in here. And so we rely upon them to tell us what those problems and what those issues and what those are. So we're taking a look at what the issues are, what the opportunities are, and we're also trying to find out, well, if there are these issues, what are some opportunities in Los Angeles? What can we do as a community to come together to make Los Angeles a better place to live? So we're looking at, for example, there might be a vacant lot that might be able to be turned into a park or a site for a particular school, or there might be opportunities to improve our transit system or improve our roadway because traffic congestion is identified as a big problem. So we look at, on a big picture, the citywide level, and then we also look at the community level. We identify, well, what are some opportunities? What are some things that we can do and plan for that are going to respond to the issues that our community is taking a look at? So one of the things that we try to do is we try to analyze land uses. So the slide says, analyze the compatibility of uses. So really all that is that's what makes up a particular community or a particular neighborhood. So land uses, those are stores, those are businesses, those are homes, those are residences. Those are all different land uses, and that is basically what makes up a neighborhood and a community. That's what affects our everyday lives. That's how we interact with our particular environment. So when we look to the future, when we gather this information and these statistics, we're trying to figure out how these changes that we're looking at into the future, how's that going to affect a community? How's that going to affect a neighborhood? How is that going to affect a quality of life? And by trying to ask ourselves those questions and then answering those questions, we can plan for that so that the changes that we anticipate can happen, we can try to respond to those changes and make sure that they're not going to be detrimental and harm communities. So many folks in this room I know have attended meetings in terms of a project is proposed by a developer. We're trying to figure out whether or not that particular plan or proposal from a particular developer, whether that's a good proposal or whether that's a bad proposal. So what we try to do is we compare those projects to the plans we have made to see how they line up. Is it matched? Is it consistent? Is it trying to support the community, or is it going to create harms that need to be mitigated, and we need to try to attach conditions to make sure that it's not going to harm the community or have those kinds of detrimental impacts. So back to the Department of City Planning's role. So I want to read this mission statement. So this really encapsulizes what all 260 members of the Planning Department, this is what we all strive to do every day we come to work. Many of us have been with the department for a long time. I've been with the department for 20 years. Heidi, I think you've been with the department 7 years. So let me just read what this mission is. To create and implement plans, policies, and programs. So plans, policies, and programs. Those are adopted typically by the City Council, and it lays out how the community is going to try to respond to these issues and opportunities that we've identified. That realize the vision of Los Angeles as a collection of healthy and sustainable neighborhoods. Los Angeles has 469 square miles. It is the second largest city in the United States. 35 community plans we have because Los Angeles is so large. And on top of those 35 community plans, we have many neighborhood plans as well. You can't have a one-size-all approach to planning for a city as big and diverse as Los Angeles. You need plans that respond to individual neighborhood issues, individual community issues. Everybody knows that. That's what makes sense, and that's what the planning department tries to do, is create neighborhoods that are healthy and sustainable. So what does healthy and sustainable mean? So what sustainable development means, a development that is environmentally responsible. It is development that make sure that the projects that we approve today are not going to detract from the quality of life in the future. That's really it in a nutshell. That the projects we approve today will not detract from the quality of life in the neighborhood or a community in the future. That's really the mission of what the department is trying to do. And a healthy neighborhood, meaning that you have the right mix of uses, you have schools, you have parks, you have residences, you have jobs and businesses. You need all of that to have a healthy, functioning community. If any one part of it is missing, then you're not going to have a complete community, you're not going to have a healthy neighborhood. So part of planning is to make sure that you have the right mix of uses in the right locations, and to make sure that you, putting it all together, it interacts in a way that is going to support the quality of life for the people who live here. So each with a distinct sense of place based on a foundation of mobility, economic vitality, improved quality of life for residents. This gets back to my prior point that Los Angeles is so big, 469 square miles. We want to make sure that our planning process recognizes the distinctiveness and the uniqueness of all of our neighborhoods and communities. And I think that's what's so special about Los Angeles is it's not the same. Every community has its own particular identity, its own particular history that needs to be recognized and acknowledged, and the plans need to support that particular history and that legacy that are connected to our individual neighborhoods. And so planning is intended to try to build upon that foundation, that particular community's assets, and to capitalize on those assets and help shape it as these changes occur over the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years. So planning process. So the state of California mandates each community to do planning. It's a governmental requirement, it's a legal requirement that cities and counties within Los Angeles have to plan. That's the law. We absolutely have to plan. So there are different approaches to planning. The most important is what is called the city's general plan. So it's called general for a reason because it's not specific to a particular neighborhood. It's a visionary document that points the direction for how planning within a city should be pursued. It consists of what are called goals, policies, programs, and objectives. So within Los Angeles, and as mandated by the state, we have a variety of what are called citywide elements, and they address such issues as transportation and mobility, housing, open space. So all of these different elements, as they are called, of the general plan, are laid out within the government code at the state level. Now, within Los Angeles and also within the state, we often call the general plan, and this is what is shown on the slide, the Constitution for Development. So that's a very important phrase. So remember that, Constitution for Development. So we know that the United States Constitution, the question is always, is something constitutional? Is this particular law constitutional or not constitutional? What that means for Los Angeles is all projects, all community plans, they must conform to the general plan. And if it doesn't conform to the general plan, then it's not constitutional. It's not constitutional if a project or a plan or a project doesn't conform to the vision that is laid out within the general plan. So that really is the litmus test. So under California law, all community plans, all projects must, by law, conform to the vision that is laid out within our general plan. And if it doesn't, then it's not constitutional and it can be challenged on that particular basis. So that's a kind of a bedrock principle of planning under California law, is that everything must conform to the city's general plan. Now, in Los Angeles, because we are such a big city, we have taken what is called the land use element of the general plan. That's really the most important element of the city's general plan. And we've divided it up into 35 community plans. Silver Lake, South Los Angeles, Sylmar, Granada Hills, San Pedro, those are some of the communities that we're all familiar with that have their own separate community plan, which takes the general plan, which is the big picture for how Los Angeles as a whole is intended to grow and develop, and then we translate that big picture at the citywide level, and we bring it down to the community level in terms like one of these 35 community plans.
I have a question. I'm looking at that map. La Salle and Cypress are not included. Why? Or where are we in this map?
It's part of the Northeast Los Angeles community plan area, I believe. It's a
Van Nuys, North Hollywood, Sherman Oaks, Casino, I don't see.
be right here, I believe.
Oh, that side? Oh, I
Yeah.
see, I'm sorry, thank you, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So even within individual community plan areas, there are neighborhoods. That in some cases we have what are called specific plans. So we're in the middle of preparing maps that are going to show even more detailed plans and regulations that go down to a much smaller level than just the broader community plan area.
How long will it take you to prepare that, 100 years?
No, we're actually going to be releasing it at the end of this month. And we're preparing it as background information for all of our council members. So it's organized by each of the 15 council districts. And we'll make that available to the community. We'll be posting it on our website. It's something that was long overdue, absolutely, to try to collect this kind of encyclopedia planning one-on-one information that shows all the different community plans and the specific plans and neighborhood plans. So we've been working very diligently collecting this information for the new mayor and for the new council. And then we'll put it on our website and make that available for everybody. So back to the community plan. So this is really the most important, I think, planning document. Most of our community plans, because of funding cuts that we've had over the last few years, are out of date. Most of them are about 10 years old. We are in the process of working on 10 community plan updates. Hollywood Community Plan was adopted last year. We have community plans that are currently in progress in West Adams, Baldwin Hills, and Leimert. That was approved by the Planning Commission earlier this year. South Los Angeles and Southeast Los Angeles, looking at the map. We just released the public text for those two community plans, and we'll be taking those to the City Planning Commission. I'll explain what the City Planning Commission is in a moment. Sylmar and Granada Hills at the very north of the city. The Planning Commission approved those two community plans earlier. And then San Pedro near the harbor area, that was approved by the Planning Commission earlier this year, and we'll be starting up two downtown plans, Central City and Central City North. We're hoping that with the new elected officials and with the new mayor that we'll get additional budgetary support to try to complete the updates of the other remaining community plans. Our budget has been cut quite dramatically over the last 5 years due to the economic recession, but we're hoping that with the pickup in the economy, we'll get additional planning support to undertake updates of those community plans that are out of date. So
Excuse me, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How does...
Terry, right?
I'm sorry?
Terry's your name.
Alexia.
Alexia.
Alexia from Cypress Park.
Okay.
How does the council or the planning department or the mayor or whomever decide which communities to do this planning for? Because I see Sylmar, who didn't want to be here, and Shapiro, who is very much involved. So I'm asking you a question.
It's agreed upon by the city council. So they will set the priorities for the planning work program. What we'll do is we'll provide information in terms of those communities where lots of changes that we anticipate based upon looking at building permits, projects. So therefore there's a lot of action and activity that's going to have to respond to a particular plan. Some communities are more stable. So for example, in Bel Air, the planning issues, not a lot of activity, not a lot of development. It's mostly single family. So it's not as urgent to try to respond to those community issues because there's not a lot of activity. Sometimes we'll say, there's a new transit line. That means there's probably going to be more growth, more development pressures. So it's important to respond to those development pressures and make sure that we have plans that are going to respond to those development pressures to make sure that we don't get caught off guard. Or if the plan is really out of date, then we would notify the council of that particular information. What we would prefer to do, if we have the appropriate funding stream, would to make sure that no plan is more than 10 years old, and that it's updated on a regular schedule. I know that the mayor, when he was formerly on the council, had floated a proposal to guarantee funding for the community plan updates every 10 years. I think that he was looking at some kind of parcel tax, but that didn't go very far with the city council to provide that kind of funding. But I think it's an issue for the city as a whole about how are we going to fund those kinds of community plan updates. So with the funding that we do get from the council, we're doing the best that we can with those particular resources. We have a great team of community planners. Heide is working on the Boyle Heights Community Plan, which was recently started. But our staffing resources are fairly limited, so we don't want to take on something that we don't have the funding and the resources for.
Can I just jump in real quick without, I don't want to cut off your flow, but I just want to make sure that, we want to get to questions, but also we want to get through the presentation. So I just want to let you know that Heide and the staff from the planning department and the plan check folks, they're so gracious. They made themselves available. So if you have something that's a specific question, please feel free to, pull them to the side or follow up with them later. And, just at your discretion, if you could address it. If not, kind of raise your hand, and we'll try to kind of address them towards the end as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So maybe let me just go through the presentation, and then we can take questions at the end, and then Heide and I can answer those questions. So planning. So there's the land use element, 35 community plans that identify sort of the vision for how community is supposed to grow and develop. So planning and zoning. What is the difference between planning and zoning? So can we go to the next slide? All right. So what is zoning? So zoning implements a community plan. So zoning is a very detailed land use regulation. So while a community plan is a little fuzzier, it's a little bit more qualitative, zoning is black and white. It says what you can do on your property and what you can't do on your property. So there are very specific regulations. A zoning regulation will say on your particular parcel, well, how many, if it's zoned to allow for apartments, well, how many apartments can be built? 20, 35, and that is based upon the size of the lot and whatever the zoning designation. So the zoning will say, I can build 35 units on this particular lot. Or the zoning may say only one house can be built on the lot, and it is zoned R1. Or if it's zoned for commercial, which means that only commercial businesses can go in a particular lot. And the zoning will say how many stories a particular building can be. It'll say how big the building can be. It'll say how far back from the street it can be. So the zoning regulations are very specific. They're very precise. They are enforceable regulations, and anytime anyone will pull a building permit to do construction on a particular site, the Department of Building Safety will check the plans to make sure they comply with that particular zoning. So that is what zoning is, as opposed to the plans. So to remember this concept, zoning is not policy. Policy is set by the general plan and the community plans, and then zoning implements the policy. It carries out that policy with very detailed land use regulations. The most important thing to remember about zoning is it tells you exactly what you can do and what you can't do with your property, and there are different tools and different ways of finding out to answer that very basic, most fundamental question, what can I do on my property? Or if you're a neighborhood activist and you want to find out what somebody else can do with their property, then you can also research that information, and get the basic answer to that particular question. So is that clear, basically what zoning is? All right, so I'm now going to turn to the department's organization. So the planning department was established in 1925. It was established by the city's charter. It's within the city's charter that we must have a Department of City Planning. And the department's been around for quite some time, since the early 20s. Today, the planning department, the way in which we're organized, there are three main bureaus or divisions within the planning department. So Lisa Weber is my colleague. She's responsible for what we call the development services function of the planning department. It's this row right here. So anytime a developer wants to propose a particular project, or someone wants to go to one of our public counters, either in the valley or downtown, they file an application for construction and they want to build something. They would file an application on our public counter. They would take it in. It would then be filed with the project planner, and the planner would review the case to see whether or not it conforms with the plan. The planner would take a look at it to see whether or not it conforms with the zoning. If the zoning says you can only have 35 units, the planner would check to make sure that it conforms to that. In some cases, the way our zoning laws are set up, it requires a conditional use permit, or sometimes you will file for variances or an exception, and these are requests to deviate from the regulations. So if a project is going to deviate from the regulations, let's say the height limit for a particular area is 30 feet, the developer says, I want to go to 35 feet, even though the regulations say I'm capped at 30 feet, we have to pay extra attention to those kinds of applications. We have to review them for the environmental impacts. We have to determine whether or not, even though it deviates from the zoning regulations, does it still conform to the plan, the Constitution for Development, our general plan. Hold public hearings if necessary, gather particular input, and then make recommendations to the decision makers. The decision makers are typically the Planning Commission or the City Council. So this is what the planners that are in this section of the department, that's what they do. They will review those applications that are filed for different projects to see whether it matches with the zoning or the planning, and then if it doesn't, whether it should be denied or whether it should be approved, and if approved, what kinds of conditions, all for the purpose of making sure that those projects comply with our general plan. So this middle column, this is a section that I oversee, which is basically the long range and community planning. So the section that I oversee of the department prepares the general plan, the citywide plan, all the 35 community plans, all the neighborhood plans. The Office of Historic Resources is also within this bureau. We call it the Policy Planning and Historic Resources Bureau. And then also the section of the department for the zoning code, which is the part of the city's municipal code that lays out all the city's zoning rules and regulations that implement the plan. Amendments that might be entertained by the city council that changes those regulations, those are also overseen by the section that I oversee. So that's the middle section of this organization chart. And then the final one, which is overseen by my other colleague, Eva Yuan McDaniel, it would be called resource management, and that's all the technical support for the department. That's personnel services, computers, information technology, budgeting, accounting, basically the nuts and bolts of running the department on a day-to-day basis. She oversees all of those functions within the planning department. So I think probably, yeah, Heidi, you wanted to add?
I just wanted to add that with this, our organization, we also have like our world of acronyms. I think that when we've done presentations, we always talk in acronyms, so I brought a list of the top 100 acronyms in our department, and it has the acronym.
Because there are more than 100.
Yeah, there's more, but this is kind of like the most frequently, most commonly used.
Thank
Now I'm
you,
going to go
Heidi.
ahead and pass it out.
Okay. So, and this is where Heidi's going to help me out, which is how can a neighborhood council or anybody who's really interested and can participate in the planning process, how can you start? It can be kind of daunting, I think, kind of intimidating, I think, if you haven't participated in the process, but once you get the hang of it, I know we have some veterans, Cindy, Marlene, it's pretty easy to share it, to get the hang of that particular process. So you can sign up for early notification reports, and Heidi's going to pass out how you sign up. So an early notification report, what does that mean? So I had mentioned before that when folks, the part of the, you can go back to the org chart. So when developers or even homeowners, they file an application with the planning department at the public counter, want to get a copy of those applications, we can provide you with a copy of those applications. We call it the early notification process. So you can find out what someone is proposing. And then you can do your own research, and you can do your own analysis of that particular project to see how it stacks up. How it stacks up to the community plan, how it stacks up to the general plan, how it measures up to the zoning regulations. So this chart, let's go back to the where do I start. Every project that files an application with the planning department, there's an application date, there's a case number, so we have a case number so that we can track all these different cases. We track them by year, so every year we assign a new case number and it's tracked by year. There's an address where the project is being proposed. And then there's a description of what the project is. So you'll see in this particular example, it says the examples here are all new single-family residents. In some cases, it may be a new 100-story high-rise building, or it may be a new commercial building. There'll be like a very capsule summary that describes what that particular project is. What you really want to do is you want to get a copy of that application and read the project description. And that'll provide a capsule summary of what the project is and what is being proposed. So the request type, that can be a little bit mysterious sometimes. That has to do with what is the precise kind of application that is being requested by a particular developer, whether they're asking for some kind of an exception or deviation from the city zoning regulations. So basically, when someone is filing an application, the reason why they're filing an application with the planning department, they're doing it for one reason and one reason only. They're doing it because they have to get some kind of special approval from the planning department. They're asking for some kind of an exception or deviation or variance from the city's zoning regulations, and they have to pay a visit to us. If they could go to the Department of Building and Safety and just pull the building permit, that would mean that the Department of Building and Safety has determined that their plan, they're not asking for any special exceptions, they're not asking for any special variances. It conforms 100% to the plans and the community plans, and it can be permitted what's called as of right. So as of right means that they don't need any special dispensation or any special approvals from the planning department. They're good to go. They can file their permit. So it varies from year to year, but roughly 70% of all the projects that the planning department, that the city of Los Angeles approves every year, about 70% we don't see, the planning department doesn't see, because they've been determined to comply to the city's plans and the city's zoning regulation. So that relatively small percentage of cases that require extra attention, public review, public hearing, that comes to the planning department, those are coming to the department because someone's asking for something special, something unique, some kind of deviation or exception from the plan or the zoning regulations, and that's why the planning department is taking a look at those. So that's a very important distinction. That's about 30% of all projects in Los Angeles that get built. They have to pay a stop at the planning department first before they can be approved. So that's why it's so important, because a developer is asking for an exception, asking for a deviation, asking for a variance from the plans and regulations that the community has been so invested in creating in our community plans, or that the council has approved as part of our general plan, or the council has approved as part of our zoning regulations. And the developer, they want to do something different than what those plans say. We have to pay extra attention to those and make sure that the environmental impacts have been addressed, that it doesn't deviate so far from the plans that that's not constitutional. So remember when I said at the beginning, the general plan is the constitution for development in the city. The basic question is, even though someone is asking for an exception from our plans and our zoning regulations, the question is it still constitutional? And that's what the planning department is charged with doing, answering that basic question, is it constitutional? So these different case types, whether it's a specific plan exception or a variance in the zoning regulations, just to kind of remove the mystery behind all of that, it all has to do with answering that basic fundamental question. Someone is asking for a change, some kind of exception from the city's plans and zoning regulations. And the planning department, in partnership with the community, we're asking the basic question, does a project have merit? Can the project still be approved? Or must it be denied because it doesn't match up with the city's general plan and our long-range plan envisioned for the city? And that's where we need your help, quite frankly, and that's why we do this early notification process, to get that input early on particular projects. So how do I look up a project case? We're going to get some special training from our GIS staff. Eber is here to going to be providing some of that training. So this is how you can look up a particular project or case. This is our planning website, www.planning.lacity.org. If you have access to the internet, you can look up all those cases. There's this case information that is shown. So if you want to look up a project in your particular area, this is where it says case information. This is the tab that you're going to want to click on your computer. You can see that. And summary case information, that'll provide, Heidi, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe every 2 weeks we provide an update of all the cases that are filed by community.
Yes, by neighborhood council or by county.
All right, so it's by neighborhood council area, and you'll get that particular information. So that's where you can look at the cases that have been filed, and then you can track that particular case. The planner who's assigned to that particular case, you can find out who the planner is that's assigned to that particular case. You can contact that planner, and then that planner can give you more information about where that particular project is in the process, whether we're doing the environmental review, when the public hearing is going to be scheduled, if a public hearing has been set up. You can review the case file, gather all the information, contact the planner, and they'll provide that particular information for you. So that's really the best way for neighborhood councils and anybody who lives in a particular neighborhood to participate in the process, is by accessing information. So I know Plan Check NC, they meet every month. I try to go there every month. Plan Check is an organization, it's a terrific organization that brings together the land use chairs of all the different neighborhood councils. And its mission is to provide information and to encourage access to this information by the community and by neighborhood councils. So this is a way in which on specific projects that are going on in your particular neighborhood or community, you can access that information by going to this website and following these helpful hints. And you're going to get some special training later today to provide you with the tools to access that information. So just some helpful links on our particular website. There's the City Department's website, the zoning information. You're going to get information on the city's zoning regulations. It's a tool that's called ZEMAS. It stands for Zoning Information Map Access System. It's a really terrific tool for ZEMAS to try to get basic information about zoning regulations for a particular property. And then we also have a document called Do Real Planning, which was a recitation of the goals of our prior planning commission and what they accomplished over the last 8 years as appointed by our former mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa. When the former mayor appointed that commission, they enunciated 14 principles, 14 goals that they had when they were appointed by the mayor. And then this document, what it does is it identifies how they did, what the accomplishments were over that particular 8-year period. And then if you have any questions about anything that I just recited, or if there's any information about a project or a case, Heidi Lopez is our neighborhood community liaison. Her contact information is right here. As you're getting frustrated or you're trying to find out exactly what's going on in a particular project, Heidi is very terrific. She will troubleshoot on that particular case for you, link you to the right planner, link you to the right information, make sure that you're connected to the information on our website, or make sure that you're going to have access. It's a pretty big department, 250 planners. Heidi is there for you to make sure that you're going to have access to that particular information. So that concludes my presentation. That's just a very broad overview, but now we'll take questions if we have any. Yes, ma'am.
I have a simple semantics question. Does the word variance have any a similarity or equality to CUP, conditional use permit?
It's a very good question. So a variance, so in the city's charter, there are identified two different types of cases. One is called a variance and one is called a conditional use permit. So I'll explain the difference between the two. So a variance is an application for some kind of a deviation from the city's zoning regulations. And there are certain findings that have to be made as set out in the city's charter. They're also in state law. But the main thing is that a zoning administrator who's appointed by the director of planning, sort of like an administrative law judge, they have to make a finding of hardship. That there's something unique about that property, something unique about that particular site. There's some reason why they can't comply with the zoning regulations, and so therefore they need special relief in those zoning regulations. So they file for what's called a variance. But the most important thing they have to do is establish my property is different than the other properties in the same area, and I have a special hardship, and that's why I can't comply with those zoning regulations. So for example, maybe the lot's too small, or it's on a steep hillside, or there's some geologic condition that might prevent complying with whatever that zoning regulation. They would petition the zoning administrator and say, there's something unique, something special about my site that nobody else has in the same area, and so therefore I want a variance from that zoning regulation. And there's a hearing, there's a report that has to be filed to make that particular case. A conditional use permit is very different. A conditional use permit says this particular use is recognized as an important use in the community, like a school, for example. We have to have schools, or we might have to have some other kind, airports, golf courses. These are important uses in the functioning of a community, but because they're so unique and special, we don't want to regulate them through the zoning regulations and have them go through directly to building safety, and they're typically larger. So we're going to have a conditional use permit. So they have to be filed with the planning department. We have to have a public hearing, and we have to study it and analyze it and attach conditions. That's why it's called conditional use permit, to make sure that it's going to function in the community. So one example that I have, so the Sunshine Canyon landfill in the northern part of the city, I think it's in Selmar.
Granada Hills.
Granada Hills? Okay, Granada Hills. That's been operating under a conditional use permit probably for about 30 years. So it's a joint conditional use permit held by the county and then also by the city, because it sits on both county land and also on city land. There are probably about 500 or more conditions that are attached to that conditional use permit to operate that landfill, because it's necessary to collect waste across the whole region. That's a necessary use. But if you don't manage it appropriately with the right conditions, it can create a real impact on the community in terms of noise, odors, waste. So all that has to be conditioned and appropriately managed. So that is why we have a conditional use permit process, to make sure that it's going to comply with those conditions. So typically, conditional use permits, once they get them, we monitor them to make sure that they are compliant with those particular conditions. So I hope that explains the distinction.
Very
Yes, ma'am?
This list of zoning designations, is that being condensed such that, for example, R1 is being eliminated in favor of a designation called low, medium 1 and low, medium 2, and so on? Can you explain those?
Sure. So what you stumbled upon is the distinction between what's called a zoning designation and what's called a general plan land use designation. So back within, I mentioned the 35 community plans, we have what are called land use designations, which are broader than the zoning designations. And so that's a tool for looking at a community plan and saying this area should be planned for low-density residential. But then what we do is we say there might be 4 or 5 different zoning classifications that fit under that category of low density. So we have, under low density zoning, or R1 or single family zoning, we actually have about 30 different types of single family zoning in Los Angeles. About 30 different kinds. So it's not just R1, we have what's called RE zoning, which is residential estate. We have suburban area zoning. We have agriculture zoning, which is called A1 and A2. Or actually you can do farming, but it's typically in Los Angeles it's used for single family residences. But so all those different zoning classifications, they're all put under the bigger umbrella of a land use designation that's shown in the community plan. One of the things that the state law says is that all the zoning for a city has to be consistent with the general plan. So that's how we make sure that any zoning rules that are actually define what you can do or not do with your property, that's how we make sure that it complies with the general plan, because it always, under state law, they always have to be consistent. They can't contradict each other. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir?
One on with what she was asking. R1 in my neighborhood is single family, but if one house has 2 or more families, is that legal? I mean, they have separate entries in that one house.
Well, that would depend upon, that would get in terms of whether or not it's an R2 zone, it's called a duplex zone, and whether or not it may have been zoned for R2 at one point in the past, and it would have what's called a non-conforming right, meaning that a non-conforming right means that they were able to build a duplex at some point in history, And so they have a right to stay there. If they were going to change it, then they would have to go back to R1, or if it was demolished, they would only be able to build one residence. Or it could be, very well be, that it's an illegal use. If it's 2 residences on one lot that's zoned for only 1 residence, sometimes that happens. I mean, there are definitely instances of illegal construction things. And we need to enforce that. Oftentimes that's a building safety issue.
Can I find out from Zima whether it's an R1 or
Yes.
duplex?
Yes, you can.
May I follow on to that?
Yes.
I just found out within the past week or so, in the R1 zone, there is state law that says that you can build a separate individual building on an R1 lot. And I found out just in distributing leaflets that we have an R1 home in our single residential community. It has a separate house and separate address on the same lot. So I just found out that that's actually legal.
You're absolutely right. So there's a state law that allows what are called accessory dwelling units.
Granny
So,
units.
yeah, granny flats. So one of the things that's interesting about zoning in California is that oftentimes the state will pass a law that supersedes what we can do at the local level. And if the state passes that kind of a law, there's nothing we can do about it. We have to comply with that state law. So the state legislature, they pass a law. It's oftentimes called the granny flat law, but it basically just allows accessory dwelling units. There are different rules about how big that accessory dwelling unit can be built. We have a memo that we can provide to you. I believe it's on our website that lays out the rules for accessory dwelling units. Heidi, did you want to make a comment?
It's CA Memo 120, and I could make sure to pass it out. Anything that we talked about today, or the PowerPoint, or any of the handouts, I could send them out as a PDF and just make sure that everything has.
And that really kind of gets at the complexity of zoning, because you have the local rules and you also have a lot of state laws that supersede local laws as well. So you have to weigh both of those. So even though it may be zoned R1, you're absolutely right. Under local laws, it says only one dwelling, but then the state comes around and says, well, we're going to allow a second dwelling unit under certain conditions, and we have to comply with that particular law. Yes, ma'am.
How do BTTs fit into the residential zoning structure?
All right, so that's an interesting acronym. So is that on the list of 100 acronyms, VTT? Vesting Tentative Tract Map.
Yes, it is.
All right, so vesting.
Did you say B as in boy, T?
V as in Victor.
Oh, thank you.
So what does that have to do? So a tract map, so there's a state law called the Subdivision Map Act. So anytime that you want to sell property, it has to be subdivided for sale. So there's a whole law at the state level that we implement if you want to divide lots for sale, or if you want to build condominiums, you want to sell each individual condominium, you have to file what's called a tract map. Now, typically, the vesting and the tentative, so I'll explain what those two mysterious terms mean. So a tentative, meaning that someone files a tract map with the planning department, and it's tentative because it's their initial application to subdivide property for sale. They want to sell condos, or they want to sell single-family homes, and you have to divide it up. We have to divide it up because that information is then provided to the county assessor. So that establishes what the parcels, and then that's how property taxes are then attached to any particular parcel. So when you get your tax bill from the county assessor, that's because we provide that information to the county assessor to divvy up parcels for sale. So there's a whole process for subdividing land and figuring out what it is for sale. So the tentative, meaning it's an initial application, we take it in, we do the whole kind of environmental review. Again, all tract maps under state law still must comply with the city's general plan, again, the Constitution for Development. We have a hearing. If we need to have improvements required, let's say for street lights or street trees or roads, that's our opportunity to get those kinds of public improvements as a condition of allowing someone to subdivide property. And it's called vesting. The V for vesting stands for that when they file for it, they are going to be protected from changes in the law after they file for it. So they will only be subject to the laws at the time they file for it. So that's why it's called a vesting tentative tract map, meaning that they have what are called vested rights. I don't know if that answers your question. Oh, great.
In general, what would be the basic role of the land use committee in relation to the whole process of planning?
The general rule?
Yes, of the land use committee in the neighborhood council level.
At the neighborhood council level?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically the role as identified within our city's charter. So in 2000, the voters approved major amendments to the city's charter. They increased the number of members of the Planning Commission from 5 members to 9 members. The voters also approved amendments to the charter that established what are called 7 area planning commissions. Many of you are familiar with the 7 area planning commissions. And they also approved a new Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. We have representatives from Dunn. That was established in 2000 under the city's charter. And then also the charter recognizes neighborhood councils. So there's a whole process of certified neighborhood councils. They have an advisory role, but they have a special role under our system of government, land use regulations, that provides special funding, special role for certified neighborhood councils. So they don't have decision-making authority the same way that a planning commission, which is appointed by the mayor or the city council as elected, but they have an important advisory role as spelled out in the city's charter on all matters pertaining to city government. So that's in a nutshell, that's the role of neighborhood councils. And the charter and the regulations that govern the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. There's an ordinance that established the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment that's within the administrative code. All those rules are spelled out in the city's codes and regulations. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's basically, it's an advisory role, but it is acknowledged by the charter as a role that's different than, let's say, just a homeowner association or some other neighborhood group or business advocacy group. They're not acknowledged by the city's charter in the way that the neighborhood council is acknowledged as having a special role under our charter.
Does the planning department respect the recommendations of the committee?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we take all of those recommendations very seriously, and we do provide that early notification packet, but only to certified neighborhood councils. We only provide that information as an acknowledgement of that special role that is only provided to certified neighborhood councils. It's not provided to other groups that are not certified CNCs. So there are homeowner associations and homeowner organizations that are not acknowledged as meeting the Dunn requirements or the city charter requirements, and they don't get that special acknowledgement under our system.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, to that point, so it seems like the planning department is saying that local communities, not only do you want our input, but it's crucial to your department to understand what's going on at the local level.
Yes.
And so to that point, then, what is the director's interpretation? Because we're having this issue in Eagle Rock where they want to build a mini mall, and they're saying, look, we're going to get a director's interpretation. And so I'm interested in knowing from the department, why do that if, in fact, we want a public process and we want local input? Why would you then do a director's interpretation?
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that case.
So that it's again, they want a variance, and we have a specific plan in Colorado. They want to reuse a building, and
They meaning a developer?
A developer, right? And so they instead of going before us and then having a public process where the community can weigh in, they told us that they were advised by the planning department to do a director's interpretation, which there is no process, right, public process.
In some cases, and we try to limit those interpretations, in some cases, the regulations may be unclear, and then there's a process, although it can be appealed, so I'll get to that.
Okay.
So all interpretations, either for specific plans by the Director of Planning or interpretations by zoning administrator, a case still has to be filed.
Right.
You can still access that particular case on the planning department's website. And if you disagree with that interpretation, there is still a 15-day appeal period, and you can still appeal that to the Area Planning Commission.
But I mean, philosophically, what would be the advantage from your standpoint of seeking the director's interpretation or allowing the director's interpretation versus a local, like most of them go through land use committees?
We want to have that authority to interpret plans and regulations. It has to be used on a very seldom basis.
Okay.
I mean, very judicious process, because the authority is only if regulations are written in such a way that they're so confusing or they're so unclear that we have to interpret them in a way to make them clear. That is what an interpretation is. If we haven't done our job and written clear regulations, that's a problem, but that's a different issue that needs to be resolved. One of our projects that we're looking at is to try to rewrite all of our zoning regulations, because the last time that they were comprehensively revised was actually in 1946. So that was 67 years ago. To kind of get at that issue of regulations that use old archaic terms and language, it hasn't been updated, or it's using legalese and no one can really figure it out. So that's what an interpretation is supposed to do, is to try to clear up that ambiguity. But it has to be ambiguous in the first place, and it's to try to figure out, well, what was the intent behind this regulation? What did it really mean? That's the whole point. It's not to allow a deviation or an exception or an amendment to it. It's trying to interpret what did it really mean. It's not to try to chart a new policy or a new direction. It's just to try to figure out, well, what did that person who was writing it 50 years ago or 25 years ago, what was really meant by that? And we're trying to clarify it. Yes, sir.
We get the packets through early warning, okay? And who tells the builder or the person who filed the case to come to the neighborhood council? And if they don't, how does the process stop?
It's not mandatory. So going to the neighborhood council is not mandatory under our codes and regulations. It's recommended, but there's no city law that says that you have to stop first at the neighborhood council. Now, by practice, a lot of elected council members will say they don't want to hear from a developer until they first made a stop before the neighborhood council. But under the city's charter, establishing the neighborhood councils and under our codes and regulations, it's not mandatory. It's certainly advised. It will make the process a lot go more smoothly. We certainly recommend to anybody that is filing an application for development to attend the neighborhood council, but you can't make them do it unless there was a change in the law. Yes, sir.
Can you talk more about the community plans, the process that it plays out? Like we're in the Westlake area. Are we up for a new plan to be updated? And also I was looking at your website while I was on my mobile, and in some instances I couldn't access it because it was asking me for some special, just for perhaps you might want to update it, or a lot of people with. And as a follow-up question, in terms of trying to understand, it sounds like you have a tremendous amount of information about our community as it relates to neighborhood councils. Do we have accessibility through you to the most up-to-date information about our neighborhood as you pull information, say, from the census and other sources that you are constantly probably are monitoring? And do we have access to that so that we can take that information and hopefully use it to create a better neighborhood for our residents?
Yes, we do put on our website all that statistical information, the census information. We can organize it by census tract and also by community plan level. So we do have that information. Heidi can point you out to provide access to that information. As far as the community planning process, I'm going to invite Heidi, putting you on the spot.
Yes.
To provide just kind of an overview about the community planning process, how we update community plans, what the process is. Typically it's a multi-year process, but Heidi, we're at the very beginning stages for the Boyle Heights plan. So
yeah, so normally, just like the general, we're required to have a community plan for every city and county. The same applies to the 35 community plans. We're supposed to update them every 10 to 15 years. So normally that process starts out with small focus groups, and by way of public participation and what the feedback that we get from the public, along with a land use survey, we start developing some type of project description to address what we're going to update in a community plan. That process is it's very participatory. In that instance, we are required, obviously, to engage with the public, and we go through that process, and we take the plan to the commission. Or before we go to the commission, we go through an environmental review process. After that, we take it to the commission, and they make a recommendation. And the 15 council members are the ones that, vote yes or no on that. But I think Ellen was briefly explaining that some of the plans were put on hold. That's what happened to our plan, the Boyle Heights Community Plan. It was put on hold. It just came back.
Through the funding cuts.
Yeah, through the funding cuts, but it was brought back, I think it was Measure R and other
Right.
pots of money.
Right.
So you can always contact me, and I can put you in contact with the planner that's in charge of your community plan area, just to get a feeling for what's coming up next. Is our community plan going to be updated? Are you guys doing a specific plan? Is there a historic preservation overlay? So just so that you kind of know what's going on in your community, I can put you in contact with that community planner. And I don't know if that answers your question.
You spoke about Boyle Heights. My question was about Westlake. Is
Yes,
there
sir.
a new community plan for Westlake? Has it already happened?
I think the Westlake one, I'm not sure right now, but I could put you in contact with that planner that's in charge of that area, and I could definitely let you know what's going on. The reason I went to this website is because we have this really cool GIS map gallery. So that has all our census information. And maybe later on we'll come back and we'll look through this. But if you wanted any census information, it is up here. So we're very transparent in terms of our data as well. I mean, everything's uploaded. You could look at information by council district, by neighborhood council area. And I don't know if that's getting a little bit too technical, but I think this is a good
As you can
transition.
see, it has Census 2000 information, and we have Census 2010
Yeah,
already.
our
And
demographer is going to update that information pretty soon.
Yeah, and you're saying that I can go in there and select my neighborhood council specifically, and it will select just that area and give me all that information.
As you can see here, you could probably select it by a general area. We have 7 area planning areas, area planning commissions. So if you see how they're divided up there, you could kind of check out where Westlake is at, and then go to the general area. And I think Ever is going into the, what plan is this?
I went into a
The
different
Westlake.
map.
You see how Westlake's in the middle right there? And
Right.
then the information on the right gives you information by population, age, and what have you. So
But
we
again,
can walk you through this.
as you know, you have to understand, we have Westlake South, we have Westlake North. I have a very specific interest in charge from my
And
constituents.
Definitely.
And I want to focus on Westlake South. I want to be able to know what's going on in Westlake South. I found an application through a group called Healthy City. You probably heard of it. They have narrowed it down to neighborhood council areas. So I would love for you to provide in-depth detailed information, because we have been trying to get a lot of information at the local level, just so we can understand better our neighborhood so we can understand their needs and then turn around and do something for the community that will have an immediate impact. And the more information you can help us get, and since it sounds like you're planning and you have all these resources, we really would love for you to help us out in that respect.
Okay, I totally understood, and after the meeting, I'll be here, so I could definitely look up the planner for that area, and you're able to get, more specific information.
But not only for my area, I'm suggesting it for every single neighborhood council, if it's not already drilled down to the specific neighborhood council, that they can just go in and select their neighborhood council and get all their census tracts within that neighborhood council, all the census information, and everything else that you think we should know, so that we can be better participants and also be better partners with you in this incredible, worthwhile endeavor that you're engaged in, which is to making a better, beautiful city for all of us.
I'll take that back to our manager.
I just want to say that, absolutely, everything you're saying is super important. I don't want to sound like we're complaining about our budget cuts, but our funding sources for our statisticians and demographers have actually haven't been as robust as they have. We're always getting funding from block grant money to pay for statisticians. We're trying to restore those positions in the departments so we can update that particular information. We actually didn't get funding to update the Westlake community planning area. We did submit some applications to try to get the funding for that, but they were not successful. But it absolutely should be updated. It's right on the edge of downtown. It is an area where we do anticipate a lot of changes, and so I would say that it's critical that we do in fact try to provide that kind of a plan update, but it's a resource question. Yes, sir.
What could we do to help you with that?
Contact your elected official, the mayor and the council member.
Is there anything
Because
local we can do?
our budget, we will be, we prepare our budget every year, and we actually, it seems like we are always in the process of preparing our budgetary information. We will be getting started in the fall for the budget process for the next fiscal year, which starts July 1st, 2014. We would love to hear from this group and from neighborhood councils about what your priorities are for community plans and for community plan updates. We can put on our website that shows all the plans that are being updated and what the status is for all those plans, where they are in the status, and then you'll see what plans that are on hold or that haven't been updated. I would invite you to take a look at that information and then provide feedback to the Director of Planning, Michael LeBron, in terms of, as we go through the process of preparing our budget, what you think our priorities should be. Because we prepare that information and then we submit that to the mayor, and then the mayor submits that budget information to the council. Yes, sir.
Just kind of point of information. That data was provided neighborhood councils by Dunn. It was one of Dunn's, when it was started, census data. I have the shape files and all the data from 2000 from Dunn. I've been pushing for years just to bring this to the table. Because even minimal services, so I would say you could interface with Dunn, because Dunn is like the authority on all the neighborhood council, and with the big data project that's happening this summer, it could be part of what Stephen does with
Stephen Box?
Stephen Renner.
Oh, okay.
He's the new general GM for the agency, for the IT agency of the city.
Right.
And it's about the big data. So I actually have the shape. It's actually online in that. So I would, and part of what you're saying too is really good, because we need to operate as regions, and what the planning department has their regions, so they're really within those. For them to drill down takes a lot of extra stuff, when Dunn should be the one that interfaces with them, and that's who we should be talking to. This is good for us to know they're regional, but we need to know our regions better, and we need chunks so that we can operate as regions, so we get our numbers up, and that's the only way we can be more effective.
Alexia, right?
Yes, thank you. First, two questions. when will the recent census be updated? Do you have any idea at all?
Actually, that's another unit separate from the one that I'm in right now. Again, like.
We'll have to get back.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
got it, thank you. The other one was earlier, and I don't remember all the words you used, but you were talking about permits and things like that, because in Cypress Park, the neighborhood petition ballot and Cypress Park have been working to get Metrolink, which is God, okay, to help us by, if they can't move, we wish they would move, but if they can move, to stop releasing so many of the hazardous materials and the noise. And we had assistance from the past assembly member, Cedillo. So we were able to accomplish, actually we did in a very short time, which was probably about a year, which is like humongously good. For the, no, really, I mean, it takes 28 years, okay? So, so for them to actually, help us by listening and doing something about it, that's good. But what I'm gonna ask you, they probably have one of those permits that has been there since the beginning of time, and so how can your department help us to ask them to either move out of here, very far away, or continue with that? Because we asked them, they're gonna do something, which is good, but we were saying to them that maybe in 10 years, other people will come by and ask them for more. So why instead of right now saying, oh, we can, I know they can, but they say they can't, okay? Doing more instead of less, it's a lot of information, so can you help me out with that? What permit did they get, first of all, and do they still have it? Can we revoke it?
Well, so MTA, unfortunately, is a governmental agency. It's not subject to planning department rules and regulations. Typically, our authority extends to regulating private development, private operators, but MTA, they're not subject to our rules and regulations. Now, I know that the mayor appoints several members to the MTA board, so has leverage over that, but it is governed by a board. We just recently met with Mr. Cedillo, the planning department executive staff. I believe he is on the transportation committee, but I'm not 100% certain about that.
And the land use.
He's on transportation. He's also on, yes, he is on the planning committee, as is now being called under the new city council under Mr. Wesson. So I would definitely invite you to approach Mr. Cedillo about this particular issue. Unfortunately, they're not operating under conditional use permit if they are emitting those kinds of pollutants. So there's nothing that our department can do about it, but the city council and the mayor, we have leverage over MTA because we appoint members to that board. So I would approach Mr. Cedillo first.
Thank you.
Information about the 2010, it's online, Google Census 2010, and you can juggle any way you want the information 2010. Yes.
Oh, thank you, okay. See, Heidi, you can do the same.
Oh, now that much better. Are there any more questions related to the Planning 101? I think we're going to probably, Cindy and Amber, I think we should do maybe 2 more and then transition to the ZMS or take a break, or how's everybody?
Yeah, just 2 more, and then I think we want to definitely get to the other portion of the training, and so definitely make sure that you reach out to IDA. And the plan check folks, they've been so wonderful in following up with people and providing information. So you have a lot of opportunities to get your questions answered beyond this section.
I have one more, I'll let anybody else have another question.
There is a question.
Oh, sorry, hold on. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Jose Torres, and I have almost a comment because so you are planning to adopt in a constitution for the next use of the land, so the next probably 50 to 100 years, right? But my question is, are you going to use the regulation that we used or that been adopted 40 or 50 years ago to planning for the future?
No. I mean, we want to use the best information that we have today. So the zoning regulations that I mentioned, that the last time they were really comprehensively updated was in 1946. But there have been probably 1,000 amendments over the